Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
you gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Chase
show up.
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got him at 2.
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to be great and dominate.
All right. Welcome back into another edition of Operation Domination. Don't hope to win, be great, and dominate, baby, because we got the wide receivers to break down as we are inching ever so closer to the NFL draft, the season outside the season when it comes to fantasy football and dynasty and everything else, because then we finally get rookie drafts. And I mean, rookie drafts, they kick off the draft season in of itself, and the draft season is what fantasy football is frankly all about. So we got all excited for it. As always, I'm your host, Dan Mater. Just Adam LaRue with me here in the building. We went from 4 to 2, but we'll still make this kind of work, and I'm sure we'll have some great conversations moving forward. Make sure you download Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app and check out our video content when you go to the Fantasy Football Advice Network YouTube channel at FF Advice Net. All right, Adam. So we talked quarterbacks, running backs so far. Make sure you go back, check those out, download those podcasts. And the way we started off those shows is basically talking about the baseline, the archetypes of these receivers. And again, I'm not saying you choose the archetype over the prospect. I'm saying you use this as a baseline to help with tiebreakers in certain situations. What type of archetypes actually hit more often? I think it's just an important thing for people to know if they're not already in the know, you know? I just had to say that. But anyway, so most of the positions, quarterbacks, running backs, and tight ends, when we get to that next week, were 3 main archetypes. For the wide receivers, there actually came out to be 4 types. And as you go through them, I think you guys will recognize them pretty much right away. But so I'll start off with the number 1. I'll go through them. And then Adam, I'm going to kick it to you and let me know, which ones you go for. Do you agree with what the model's saying? And what are some insights that you have, maybe you target in other situations? So basically the main 4 is a versatile route running wide receiver, a polished perimeter receiver, a slot heavy receiver, and a freak athlete wide receiver, which is usually a perimeter receiver, but they're not as polished as an actual receiver skill, which is why there's a differential between a polished perimeter and a freak athlete wide receiver. So the number 1 archetype that hits, and I don't think this should be really come as a surprise for most people who have been following football for the past few years at the very least, is the versatile route runner type of wide receiver. Now, these guys, typically speaking, you're looking for over 3 yards per route run. You're looking for a route grade of over 86. And you're looking for an alignment of somewhere between 20 to 60% from the slot and at least 35% out wide. So versatile alignment, good route runner, and you're very productive as far as yards per route run is concerned. Now, some examples that jump to mind in this situation would be like a CeeDee Lamb. When he came out, he was a near 4 yards, per route run type of wide receiver. He had a 90 route grade. He was 30% in the slot, 70% out wide, hitting that mark. And another one, even more recently, Malik Neighbors, who was like as versatile as they come. He was damn near 50-50 from the slot to the wide alignment. He was 3.6 yards per route run. He had a 93 route grade. Those guys really lay out that versatile polished route runner, and we've seen what dividends that can pay from a fantasy football perspective. The perimeter receiver is still very much a receiver that can hit in fantasy football. Now, for them, you're having a little bit of a different baseline. It's not too far off, but more like a 2.9 yards per route run, at least an 85 route grade. Usually they're going to line up at least 75% of the time out wide. So that's what you're kind of looking for with these guys. Some examples that come to mind. Drake London, when he came out, he had an 86% wide rate alignment. He had 3.52 yards per route run. He had a 91 route grade. And of course, Jamar Chase was another big example of this as a perimeter polished route running wide receiver. What's funny about those two, when I bring them up in that archetype, is that when they got to the NFL, they became more versatile. So it's a big reason why so coming out of college, these were considered widely perimeter type of players, but we've seen Atlanta where Drake London lines up all over the field. We've seen in Cincinnati where Jamar Chase lines up all over the field. So they actually kind of want to become versatile in the NFL. Funny enough, that trend kind of continues when I talk about the slot wide receivers, the slot heavy guys. Now, this is actually the archetype that has, of the top three anyway, that has the slender margin of being able to hit, because you can't just be a slot only type of wide receiver in today's league and expect to be a wide receiver 1 type of player. Like, might be a wide receiver 2, might be a wide receiver 3. But being that teams are playing less and less 11 personnel, you have to be a wide receiver who's going to be on the field in 2 receiver sets to consistently hit elite ceiling type of numbers. So these guys have a slimmer margin of error. You want at least 2.5 yards per route run. You want at least a 79.5 route grade. And these are typically guys you're going to see they're going to line up in the slot at least 65% of the time, usually more towards 70. But the problem that you think of when you think of route receivers is the guys who, when they do line up outside, they don't really have the strength or the size to kind of get open on the perimeter. That winds up being the issue. But when you look at positive examples, similar to the perimeter wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, 98% of the time he was in the slot when he was in LSU coming out. And Jalen Waddle, 68% of the time coming out of the slot when he was in Alabama. And I can go through their numbers, but the first thing that should jump out to everybody right away is like, well, their size. They were not sized like typical slot wide receivers. This is going to come into play throughout this show, by the way, which is another reason why we're breaking this all down. The fourth tier and the tier that busts the most, but gets overhyped the most going into the NFL draft, is that freak athlete perimeter type of wide receiver. We're talking about guys who have a 93 or higher percentile athleticism score. Maybe they come in about 2.2 yards per route run, maybe about a 73 route grade, somewhere around there. The point is that you're looking at guys who are freak athletes, but do not necessarily have the production and skill of a wide receiver. And the target earning ability of a wide receiver is much more important than his athleticism ability. So for these freak athletes, think Henry Ruggs, think John Ross, think, back in the day, Darius Hayward-Bay, big, physical, can run fast through the gym, but were never able to produce and didn't have necessarily the production profile coming out of college to begin with to do that. And yet we fall in love with the combine when a guy tests off the charts, but if he doesn't have the production to boot, it's usually a wide receiver who's typically going to miss. In fact, they miss 80% of the time for the wide receivers that fall into this category. Now, I know I just hit you with a lot, and I just did a lot of talking, so I want you to do some talking. When you look at those archetypes and what I've just laid out, what do you agree with? What else do you see? What do you disagree with? What do you look for?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, versatile would be my answer for sure. And I think the reality of the situation, right, is like, regardless of offense, and kind of like what you laid out with Jamar Chase and Drake London, the guys who ended up kind of becoming versatile guys after hitting the NFL, is ultimately teams want to move their best wide receiver around, or at least good offensive coordinators and good offenses want to move their best wide receivers around. Not necessarily every NFL offense is that, but that's like the dream. And when you're drafting for fantasy, you want to get guys who are getting moved around, who are getting that treatment of like, we're trying to move you around the formation. We want to get you different matchups. We want to get you advantage matchups as much as we possibly can. We're trying to make sure you're not just like going against their CB1 all the time. So, guys who we're going to prioritize moving around is what you want to do. So it's kind of like you were saying, like guys who are great route runners, guys who in the modern NFL especially, right? And I think this pairs nicely with why the elite athlete is kind of that worst bucket, but it's like the guys who really understand zone coverages and can find the gaps there, because at the end of the day, like zone rates, I know this year kind of ticked in the opposite direction a little bit, but generally speaking, over the last 15 years, like zone rates have freaking skyrocketed, right? Like in 2012, it was like bordering upon 40% man. And now I know 2023 was like 25%. I think it got closer to 30 this past year, but it's like a lot. Even like some top defenses this past year were like 70% zone. So like, point being, okay, great. This athlete might just be so freakish that he can get off the line of scrimmage and beat guys one-on-one, but like the end of the day, if you're not finding soft spots and zones, and if you're not figuring out how you can manipulate safeties, how you can like kind of look guys off, how you can, leverage your body to get guys to kind of move how you want. Like, if you're not doing those nuanced things, like, it's not going to be successful. Maybe it could be against man, but that's just not the way that most of the NFL operates right now. I think the team, I forget who it was, but like the team who ran man the most in the NFL last season was like 40%. And they were like an outlier by like 5%. So like all of that to say, like, that winning one-on-one, like, it just isn't how you win consistently in a volume way in today's NFL. So you just have to be a smart, nuanced receiver. You have to be someone who can catch the ball in traffic, but that can't be the only thing that you do. So it's getting separation. It's being someone who can move around the field. And to me, what I'm looking for is, you mentioned that yards per out run. I think that's a big part of it. And then I want guys who, especially when we talk about that outside group, that second group, have quick feet. So then I know you can transition to coming inside. So like Drake London, for example, I think he moves his feet really well, has really good footwork for his size. So coming out of USC, I was really confident that he could do those other things, that he could come in and be a big slot, that he could kind of be a flanker, that he could move around the formation and be something other than just this 6'4" who's getting, contested catches. Like, no, it's actually like, I think I even said this on the show that we were doing at the time, like, you're one of the freakiest, like, West Coast offense wide receiver prospects I've ever seen. Because just the way you leverage your body at that size, the way you can catch in traffic, but you also understand the things around you, that's really special. And I think that's what matters in today's NFL.
Okay. So, yeah, we pretty much seen it the same way then. It's just interesting to me. Again, I think we talked about this during the running back episode, where what these guys have provided in their resumes as prospects is not necessarily what they're definitely going to be pigeonholed into in the NFL, but it's just all about what can you do? What do we know that you for sure can do? And then kind of be able to project from there. And it's just funny, just like I said, going through those examples. I feel like if you told me name versatile wide receivers, all 6 of the examples from all 3 of the different archetypes I could have named in that one category, but it's not what they necessarily were coming out of college, but it kind of bolsters the idea of that's the archetype you're looking for them to be able to become in the NFL, is that versatile guy. Because the days of just the perimeter X dominating the target share of a team, of an offense, is not the key anymore. And you laid it out perfectly when you pointed out that, hey, guess what? The NFL runs 70% zone. That's a big reason why that perimeter guy doesn't dominate like he used to back in the early 2000s and the 90s and all before that. But that kind of leads me into our segue here when we talk about our tier ones, because both you and I have Carnell Tate as our wide receiver ones in our top tiers. Now, I have my reasons as to why, and let's be clear here. I think the top 3 guys, and both of us have the same top 3 guys, Carnell Tate, Makai Lemon, Jordyn Tyson, maybe in a little bit of a slightly different order. We'll get into that in a second. I think it's real close between all 3 of them. I don't have a wide gap between any of those guys. So when Carnell Tate comes in as your number 1, after everything we just kind of went through, well, how does he come out to be your number 1 receiver?
Yeah, no, I think he's a lot of what we just talked about, right? Like, a guy who has shown you on the perimeter, certainly, like, he has perimeter size. I think he can line up everywhere. I think that he's someone who, he's not like a crazy, like, long speed athlete. What we just talked about, that's not necessarily important in the NFL right now. I think under 4.6, I'm good personally, to be honest with you. And even then, like, there's examples of 4.6 guys who are successful these days, but like, that's generally like the threshold that I really need you to beat, like, end all be all. And yeah, he's someone who I feel perfectly comfortable lining him up at the line of scrimmage. Actually, I think he has a great release package. I think he's strong. I think he can do those things. I think run blocking as well, which just kind of lines up with physical, especially upper body strength. Like, both of those things, I like him a lot. Not to say that he's the best run blocking wide receiver of the class, or that's something that you're like, oh my God, I'm drafting him for his run blocking. But like, again, just to say, upper body strength is definitely there to do those things. He's someone who's shown a knack for the red zone. 13 touchdowns of the last 2 seasons, 9 this past. Someone who, look, for a guy, again, who I think you're using as like a real route running wide receiver, real guy who's just has really strong body control. And I think does, find soft spots and zones fairly well. I'm not going to pretend he's like an explosive, crazy athlete, but he makes some big plays, and he'll make some big plays after the catch. Like I just think that it's something I talked about with running backs yesterday, but I think he's got good spatial awareness. I think he, just does a really good job of finding space and maximizing what he can do after the catch. It's not super flashy, but you look at the tally at the end of a game and it's pretty solid. You know what I mean? Like, so I just think he's an all around really, really good wide receiver. I think hands are fantastic, which is something that you look at. Admittedly, some of the receivers in this class, like this has been such an interesting class because I've talked so much about zone being so important. Like looking throughout the class, there's a lot of guys who actually I think do zone really well. There's a lot of guys with poor hands in this class where like that's the problem. And we talked a little bit before the show about that's something that statistically it isn't like doesn't always carry over, right? You can have like there are years where good receivers with good hands have high drop rates. That's whatever. I don't think you're ever gonna have that problem with Carnell Tate. If you do, it's like the Jamar Chase preseason thing where you freak out for like 3 weeks and then it blows over and it's fine. Like Carnell Tate's hands are awesome. As a matter of fact, like arms outstretched from his body, I don't think there was a guy in this class, at least towards the top of this class, that I think was stronger in that regard. Some of the things closer onto the body, like on the frame and at 6'2", like it's understandable, like really good, but there are guys who I think are competitive in that area, but like arms outstretched, amazing. So yeah, just someone all around I think is really good. Like I don't think that there's anywhere where you really can poke many holes in his profile. And candidly, like both of these other receivers who I like a lot and I think are certified first round talents, each of them have a very large red flag to me, and Carnell Tate does not.
Well, just to bolster your point real quick on the hands, 0 drops while having an 85% contested catch rate and a 77% catch rate as far as the ball being thrown to him. So this is a guy, to your point, when the ball went his way, it's as surefire of a thing that he's going to catch the ball as it can possibly get, especially in this class, which is huge, especially when you're talking about a perimeter wide receiver, predominantly, at least coming out, because you're going to be looked at as a guy that we want to line you up as X. And in today's league, the way those guys eat consistently is by dominating contested catch and back shoulder situations. He's tailor-made to do both of those things. So he can be a perimeter wide receiver who does earn targets. And he was efficient. Like people want to poke holes in Carnell Tate. They'll talk about his production profile not being overly abundant, which no, it wasn't, but he was efficient whenever he got the ball. We're talking over 3 yards per route run. We're talking about a guy who had made big plays down the field on a near consistent basis. What sticks out to me is that it's the teammate thing, right? We don't knock Carnell Tate the way we would knock other guys who don't have as strong as a production profile yet going at the top of the class because, well, he's got this guy, Jeremiah Smith, who might go like number 1 overall for the first time as a receiver since Keyshawn Johnson. I don't know for sure that's going to happen, but it's a possibility it could happen because that's how freaking good the guy is. So he's had elite teammate competition, still was able to get targeted 66 times last season, still was able to show out that he is a top prospect to look at. My model comps him to a Roma Dunze, a Romeo Dobbs, and a Pat Bryant are the top 3 to kind of pop out when you look at a Carnell Tate. Perimeter type of wide receivers, a Dunze obviously the one you're kind of targeting more as far as what you want to become in the NFL, but he can move, to your point, I think he's somebody who's going to be able to move around the perimeter because he is good in those contested catch situations, because he has good body control and has those surefire hands. The struggle I had with him a little bit as far as him being my number 1 wide receiver overall is because usually if you want your number 1 receiver on your big board to be there, you want him to have a ceiling outcome. And the way my model breaks it down for wide receivers is a little bit more in depth than it would be for the other positions. Like I have to break down the difference between an elite wide receiver 1 and a wide receiver 1. And then you got wide receiver 2, 3, 4 that can still be fantasy relevant. And then we get to the bust. Well, he only has like a 3% probability of being an elite wide receiver 1 based on, again, these are based on historical comps with his production and athleticism profiles scored together. But as a wide receiver 1, he's about 31%, which is as high as any wide receiver as far as just being a wide receiver 1 in general is going to have in this class. With a 46% bust rate, that's much lower than what a lot of these guys are going to have in this class too. So basically, we're saying that I don't know if he can be the ceiling alpha superstar wide receiver, but can he be a top 12 fantasy guy? He absolutely can be, depending on where his spot is going to wind up being in the NFL draft. So that's what's interesting about Carnell Tate. Now, this is where you and I differ a little bit as far as our ordering. I have Tyson 2. You have Lemon 2. Okay, so talk to me about Lemon and Tyson. What was the tiebreaker for you there?
Really, right now there's almost none. Like I could flip them tomorrow. And candidly, I like Carnell Tate is firmly my wide receiver 1. You know this, that I do my grades like numerically. There's like Carnell Tate's like 1.5 ahead of these two. Like they're in a tier. It's not like crazy, but it's like he's ahead. And these two are like 0.2 maybe like apart. Like they're genuinely like functionally the same. And I say all that to say I've just kind of like chalked it. I'm going to let draft capital separate them for me. Like I genuinely, it'll be draft capital, be landing spot. So like from a true fantasy perspective, I could flip these, I could not. It's just going to be where they land. Now where I gave the slight tiebreaker for now to Makai Lemon. Like he's just someone, he's someone who I like the hands a lot better. I know that you only get the 1 drop for Jordyn Tyson, but he gets a lot of contested catch opportunities and they don't go his way very often. Like that's just not going to be his game. And then 6'2", it's again, we're splitting hairs. These are first round caliber guys, right? So like splitting hairs, but as a guy at his size who's getting as many opportunities as he was, like the offense so wants to live through you, dude. And it did to a degree, but it's like we're throwing it up in the end zone to you like twice a game, and it's just not working. Like at all. He is Jordyn Tyson is an awesome separator. He is so explosive, especially for being a guy who's functionally the same size as Carnell Tate. Like he is far more explosive. He's a super fun watch. He's not a developed run blocker, but I think he tries, and I think that's something that'll get there. But yeah, it was just one of those things that like rubbed me the wrong way with like how many times they try to throw it up to you, and it just didn't seem to work. Like you said, clean drops, he didn't have those. Like this isn't like a focus drop thing. Like it's just like they try to throw it up to you, and I just don't think that's his game. I think he's someone who kind of lives as a separator. Now Makai Lemon, I alluded to both these guys having big red flags. It's Makai Lemon probably is going to live in the slot, and I imagine you're going to take this conversation here, but Makai Lemon's probably going to live in the slot, and Jordyn Tyson has a hefty injury history that I can't say I know the true answers to like long term what this is and what his outlook in the league is, if this is something that's going to go away or if it's going to continue. You know, we've talked to Dr. Brian Scott about it before, and I'm sure that will be I'm sure that'll be a question he's getting a lot this offseason, kind of really until his career gets started. But yeah, so that's where I've kind of leveled it out, but I could go either way. I think draft capital ultimately decides it for me between these two.
Yeah, and that's completely fair as far as that goes. But so for me, if everything was this even and we took away like the injury issues with Jordyn Tyson, he would be my number 1 on my board. He would be over Carnell Tate for me if we took the injuries out, because to me, he is the most purebred, can do it all type of wide receiver with comps going to like Ted Hurst and McMillan and Jaden Higgins and a bunch of guys and close to Drake London here too, who also kind of pops up a little bit in the comp. Not quite as big, but does a little bit of everything, can play on the perimeter and go inside, just given his route running ability. You're right in the sense of his contested catch rate was not great, 43.8%. You'd like to see that be a little bit better when you're a 6'2" wide receiver, but the volume was there. The offense needed to flow through. And remember, he didn't even get a chance to play on full season. This guy already still almost had 100 targets on the year. 2.37 yards per route run, 32% targets per route, which is insane. So it shows you exactly how much he was just being fed all over the place. When you combine those things, he fits every offense. Like you said, Makai Lemon is probably going to be more slot leaning. Carnell Tate may get pigeonholed in the perimeter. Jordyn Tyson's not going to get I don't care what offense is out there. He's not going to get pigeonholed in one situation. He's going to be in that versatile archetype. So if you just took out the injuries, Jordyn Tyson would be my favorite wide receiver. Now, because of that and because they've been so frequent and they're soft tissues, they have a habit of popping up again throughout the NFL. So I can't discount that completely and just look the other way. That's why he kind of falls as number 2. Makai Lemon has the safest profile in my model, meaning he has the lowest bust rate. His bust rate is only at a 32%, which is insane when you're talking about these wide receivers in the first round. That's an incredibly low bust rate. He projects out to be guys like JSN, Malik Neighbors even popped out into the model as a possibility too. But then on the other side, you got guys like Sky Moore and Treylon Burks that the model also sees as potential comps as well. The thing with Lemon is that he's going to have to get a little bit stronger. So there's comps that out there that drive me crazy, and I think it's it's not fully lazy, but I think it's partially lazy, where people want to comp him to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And where I say it's partially lazy, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they went to the same school and then they're both kind of slot-leaning type of wide receivers coming out. But the reason I say it's a little bit lazy because Amon-Ra St. Brown, while technically in the same size territory as Makai Lemon, there was never any question about his strength to get off on the perimeter against bigger type of corners. That was never an issue with Amon-Ra St. Brown. You knew physically he was going to be able to be in 2 receiver sets. I don't know that about Lemon. When he goes up against bigger competition, he had a tendency to get pushed around a little bit. Now, of these 3 receivers we just talked about, he had the highest production profile. He probably has the highest target earning type of profile. Again, he went over 100 targets last year, and even going over 100 targets to still have over 3 yards per route run. And I believe he had nearly, I think it was 6.4 yak per catch. When he gets the ball in his hands, he could be explosive. And that's why some of those names that I talked about popped up in here. Ultimately, I think he's the most landing spot dependent of these 3. And that's why it kind of comes down to number 3 for me, at least heading into the draft. He winds up on the Rams, let's say. I'll be barking a totally different story. Just to be clear here, because that would be an incredible fit if that were to possibly happen. And I do think it actually has some potential of happening. So just to kind of recap, Lemon has the safest profile, in my opinion, but is also the most landing spot dependent as far as ceiling is concerned when it comes to him, Jordyn Tyson, and Carnell Tate. And that's kind of how I want to breaking it down there. But both, or I shouldn't say both, all 3 of these guys, and I think you would agree with this, definitively are top 15 type first round wide receiver caliber, in my opinion.
Yep.
Okay. So we agree on that. So basically you'll be happy with any of those 3. Let's get into the tier 2 conversation. And this might sound a little crazy, but I don't think the guys I have in my tier 2, I don't think there's as big of a drop off as people try to make it be from tier 1 to tier 2 in this wide receiver group for different reasons. But I think we are going to see at least 5 receivers go in the first round. I would not be shocked if we saw 6. Now I'm going to go to you first for your tier 2 here. Lead off with you. So you had, well, actually we had the same 3 in our tier 2. Okay, so we both had Omar Cooper, Denzel Boston, and KC Concepcion. And again, a little bit of a different order. You had Cooper, Boston, Concepcion. I have Boston, Concepcion, and then Cooper. So slightly different here. Talk to me about these 3 receivers. Why they make your tier 2? What's the gap between them and tier 1? Do these guys belong in the first round?
I think they do. You probably heard a little hesitation there. So it's one of those things where, like, I technically have them as like second round grades, but I have like 20 first round grades across all positions. So they're in my top 32, I guess is the roundabout answer. Yeah, I think they're great. Like, and I talked about this a little bit before the show. I have Brazel in this tier as well. I have him last in this tier. I don't necessarily want to get burned by a Tennessee receiver again, but I consider him to be a tier 2 receiver, and I think in the right offense, I'll get excited anyways. I don't really care. But yeah, I think all these guys are great, and I think that they all have like real upside to be quality fantasy assets for you. So I'll high level. Omar Cooper is someone who I don't do comps. I'm not a comps guy, but the one that I really love, and I hope you appreciate this because it's a bit of a throwback. This is like at the beginning of me watching football, right? It's not the Steve Smith, the other Steve Smith. Giant Steve Smith is my comp for Omar Cooper. And he, in 2010, I believe he was off to a really strong start before getting hurt. Or 2009 was like the really good season. Then 2010 he gets hurt. There's something along those lines. But at any rate, he's someone who he could use some work against man. He's pretty good, but times have changed. He is awesome against zone, just fantastic. And he's someone who the feet speed is great. I think the footwork is there to where I think he'll be a fantastic route runner at the NFL level. I just think it's, how he was used in college, but both in and out breaking, just like the sharp breaking routes, he does a fantastic job of making separation. He is someone who's great after the catch as well. So like I've heard people talk about how like every dude who's great after the catch, oh my God, he's like Debo, but he's like a way better route runner. At least the route running ceiling is way, way better. And coming out, to be honest with you, as prospects, right? So I really like Omar Cooper. He's the top of this group for me. And then after that, Denzel Boston, who is someone who I've seen so many people be afraid that he's JJ Arcega-Whiteside again. And it's just not there for me, man. Shout out a guy who is not afraid to do the 3-cone. Love it. Love it. Everyone's afraid these days. And a guy who big X receiver prototypes that way showed off that literally the one test he went to do was like, hey, I have quick feet, by the way. Don't forget that I can move laterally. And I'm really excited about that in particular with him. Like he does have quick feet. I think there's a world where he can show off some big slot prowess at the NFL level and kick inside. And in some regards, I don't think that's going to be his primary use case. I think he's going to live as an X, as an outside receiver, but he can do it. Everyone makes the JJ Arcega-Whiteside comparison because he's a good contested catch receiver, but that's not how he lived. That's something he can do. That's something he is good at. You know how he lived? And I'm not going to call him this player, but how he lived was by being a big receiver, was awesome after the catch, like Josh Gordon, and physically profile similar to Josh Gordon. He's not Josh Gordon. They're different players. I'm not comparing them one-to-one. I'm saying like he's a big guy who will throw that rate around, who does have like some really good, and 2 seasons of really good production after the catch. I think just shy of 6 yards after the catch this past season, like 5.6 or something. So yeah, I think someone who doesn't get credit for the lateral athlete he is and doesn't get credit for the things he does outside of being big receiver who catches the ball in traffic. Other guy being KC Concepcion, who, what a whirlwind of a profile. You like him a little bit more than I do, so I'm curious what you have to say, but it's just like his season before this isn't very good. This season was fantastic. He has fantastic feet. He does a really good job of separating. He's incredibly explosive. There's like a drop problem that you get like across his profile, but it's like, again, that doesn't always stick. You see catches on tape that are like really strong. Like it's not like it's all bad. Like this is like the opposite of the Tyson thing, where it's like you see some crazy catches and then you see some concentration drops, and hopefully that can get shaken out. But I think someone who I understand how you get excited. And then I'll just quickly say with Brazel, like It's Tyquan Thornton, but like if you actually refined the receiver, Dante Thornton, excuse me, but like actually refined the receiver a little bit and had him play at another school before Tennessee. I mean, Thornton did too, but like learn to be a receiver first and then go abuse the Tennessee offense. Where I think that he gets some of the nuances. He's still someone you're drafting on traits a little bit, but he's more nuanced than the previous Tennessee receivers.
Yeah, well, so I'll start.
That's a little, by the way.
It really is. So I'll start with Brazel's because that's the way you ended on him. So Brazel's real low on my board. I think compared to you, and then also compared to consensus, quite frankly, too. Part of it is what you just talked about, getting burned on these Tennessee wide receivers that we get excited about because they have these crazy production profiles. And Brazel's actually not even one who had a crazy production profile, but a lot of times they have crazy production profiles and they're athletes like Jalen Hyatt, Dante Thornton, like guys that could run past anybody's defense. You get excited about them, and then they wind up doing absolutely nothing in the NFL. I do think Brazel is more refined than a Dante Thornton and a Jalen Hyatt was, but still not overly productive as being part of the issue here. And he very much falls into the baselines that we talked about to kick off the show for our archetypes. He very much falls into the freak athlete perimeter wide receiver who's more athlete than he is receiver. And again, I talked about how that has an 80% bust rate. Those are the guys who hit the absolute least. To me, I look at Chris Brazel as like right now, NFL mock draft database, the consensus would have him going somewhere in the second round. I think most mock drafts around do have him kind of in the second round draft capital. So people are going to look at that and be like, get real excited. Like, okay, freak athlete, good draft capital. My problem is there's always that receiver, and you could throw running backs into this category too. But there's always that guy who gets that second round draft capital. You want to boosting him up and you're sitting there like, you don't belong there. You never should have been there. And he winds up busting as a result from being in that position. Chris Brazel is the guy who clearly sticks out to me as the trap door of those higher draft capital type of wide receivers. Because again, you're banking on him being able to bring fruition his athleticism. Then you have to make sure he lands in the right offensive scheme. As we talked about, not every scheme is fantastic. He might get put out there right away as the next perimeter wide receiver, but the problem could easily wind up being that he winds up on a team that has maybe a weak arm quarterback or just uses him to run the treadmill, which I think ultimately is my biggest fear. That's what he winds up into. And I don't think he's enough skill to overcome that without a development period. But the NFL is no longer a developmental league. And that's why projects like this don't tend to hit as much anymore. So that's why I have to be a little bit lower on Chris Brazel, even though I have to admit, I love watching him just as much as anybody. But
if I may, just really quick, I want to throw this out there. I think it's a distinction that's worth saying. So Brazel, to your point, is like below the thresholds in yards per route run. What I think is really fascinating about him, because it's not what you typically expect out of this type of wide receiver. He's 12th in the country this past season in yards per route run against zone, which it's just throwing out like an aberration that's like genuinely like, I don't know. It made me pause a little bit just in you typically think of the guys, oh, I'm just fast, I'm just athletic, I'm going to go beat guys one-on-one. And I think that it was a little bit more to it than that. And again, he's not like totally agree with how this could go poorly. It's a high risk, high reward type of guy, but it's one where I think the profile is a little bit better than some of the other guys we've gotten in that bucket.
What I would say to that is that has a lot to do with the Tennessee offense, because that offense is built on attacking seams and zone.
Yeah.
Like Hyatt had a real high yards per route run versus zone too. I think Thornton's wasn't quite as high, but it was still pretty decent considering the rest of his profile. That a lot of that is the Tennessee offense. So I don't know how much I can give that to Brazel. He did it, of course, but a lot of that is also kind of a fluctuation of environment.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, so the backtrack here to get back to the tier 2 guys. Denzel Boston, Concepcion would be next for me, and Omar Cooper. And you laid out great synopsis on all those guys and what they are and what they kind of bring to the table. So I'm going to take this more from the angle of, okay, how far away are they from the tier 1 guys that we talked about? And when I look at Denzel Boston in particular, in one sense, he belongs in tier 1. He has a higher probability based on, again, the model, which goes to the historical comps of production and athleticism tied in together. He has a higher probability to be a top 12 wide receiver than any of the 3 guys that I put in my tier 1. Because altogether, between elite wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 1, he has a near 50% probability. However, he is the most coin flippiest of them all because he also has a near 50% bust rate. So basically, Denzel Boston's either going to be a wide receiver 1 or he's not going to be fantasy relevant. That's what the model is saying. Like, there's no there's hardly any percentage for wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 buckets. It's like he's either going to hit big or not hit it at all, which kind of goes to what he is. He's a perimeter boundary type of wide receiver. This is not going to be a versatile weapon. This is not the archetype he's going to fall into. You're hoping he falls into that perimeter polish type of archetype, which is why guys like Rome Odunze come up. And this one I thought was interesting. Michael Thomas of the Saints came up in the profile as well. And I think he could be closer to Michael Thomas. I think he's a better route runner people give him credit for. You brought up the 20-yard shuttle, of which he finished 3rd at the combine at his size, which is incredible. Again, going back to the lateral movement that he has, and it tells me what kind of a route runner he could potentially be. His contested catch rate is what you would want out of a bigger type of wide receiver, nearly a 77% contested catch rate. And his target share, 27%. His dominator rating, over 35%. What that tells me is that as a perimeter, he is going to be a target earning type of perimeter wide receiver. Now, part of that is you still need to wind up in the right offense. And we could say that about any of these guys all day long as we could talk. But it also means to me he's going to be a touchdown guy. And he's going to be a big play guy. And if you can be a target earning guy on a, let's say, a 23% target share in the NFL with those other 2 factors, that's how you get perimeter top 12 wide receivers in fantasy football. That's where Denzel Boston fits. So that's why he's the top of my tier 2. And frankly, I can make a strong argument he maybe should be included in my tier 1 category. Casey Concepcion a little bit ahead for me on Omar Cooper. And it's mostly projecting. If I were just to look at the production profiles, it would be Omar Cooper over Casey Concepcion. However, Concepcion to me has a little bit more upside than an Omar Cooper. And the reason for that being is his yards after the catch. They're both great yards after the catch wide receivers. Concepcion's even better than Omar Cooper is. He's more twitchier than Omar Cooper is. Like, I don't think it's too much to say, like, of all the wide receivers just film watching, I can see Malik Neighbors and Casey Concepcion. With Omar Cooper, I don't think he quite has that upside as an athlete to go along with his production profile. 10.3% drop rate. People are going to talk about that all the time, especially when they're watching film, as it's going to be an issue. You laid out, statistically speaking, that never winds up being a problem going into the NFL. A lot of times, 1, it gets better because you're getting a ton more reps. And 2, drops are volatile like slumps in baseball, right? We got baseball season going on right now. Sometimes the hitter's just real hot. Sometimes he's just real cold. But that doesn't mean when he's real cold, that's the type of hitter that he is. That happens for wide receivers. For a wide receiver like Concepcion to have the production that he had this past season with one of the worst quarterbacks out of this entire group that we're talking about is what I'm looking at as like, yes, that tells me you can make lemons out of lemonade. You can make the best out of a crappy situation. And with where he should be drafted, which should be later on in the first round, there's a very good chance you're actually going to wind up with one of the teams that has a decent quarterback. So now what happens? Because some of his drops, I don't put on him. There's plenty of drops that I have on tape where the ball is, yes, it hits his hands, but it's behind the wide receiver. It's off target. He has to make an incredible catch just to make the catch. I don't put all of it on him. So I think that's where you're going to see the kind of the difference at a little bit. The other thing I think is that Omar Cooper is going to be, so Casey Concepcion, again, because I compare him to a Malik Neighbors, I think he went inside, outside, and be dynamic with his route running. Omar Cooper is going to take a certain system. Now, most of the league is West Coast, and that's where I think Omar Cooper is going to have to be. So fine, okay, whatever. But he does have to land into the right spot. I also don't see Omar Cooper having the ceiling of a guy who can truly be an alpha dog wide receiver. The way that I see that with Concepcion and Denzel Boston and all the other guys that we've talked about so far at this point. He played really well as a 1A, 1B with Elijah Surratt there in Indiana. And I don't think either one of them could have been as productive as they were without the other. Because this isn't a guy who's constantly beating man-to-man. He's a zone killer, sure, but he's not necessarily being man-to-man consistently enough for what I would like to see for guys with a high ceiling. Now, Omar Cooper, I will say he kind of goes into that lemon category of guys that I have lower bust rates on. His bust rate is at a 43%. His wide receiver 1 rate is at a 27%. His wide receiver 2 rate is at 15.9%. So he's a little bit more distribution as far as how he can potentially hit and a little less bust heavy than a Concepcion or some of the other guys that we've talked about. He projects really well to a Luther Burden. By the way, for all you people out there who want to give the Debo comp, if you're going to give a comp like that, make it Luther Burden comp. All right. Debo needs to be in a unicorn comps. I'm tired of hearing Debo comps every single day.
Don't give me a Debo comp unless they're like, if he's 6'200", I don't want a Debo comp.
Exactly.
Like, I don't need to look any further at all. No right. Debo comp.
Like, you need to be at least 220 in lineup.
I need you to look like a running back. Genuinely.
Exactly. It drives me crazy, that concept. But Luther Burden, I think, is a very decent comp for an Omar Cooper. And that could get really exciting really quickly. Again, if you wind up in the right system. I think Omar Cooper belongs in the first round. Again, I think all 6 of these guys should go in the first round. But those are the little nitpicky things that we talk about to try to see how do we break up the tiebreakers. And I think Omar Cooper falls more into a slot unpolished route runner, where Casey Concepcion, I think, does fall very much into that versatile route running separator archetype that we talked about being one of the top ones. We'll see how it breaks out. Let's move into our sleepers. All right. And these are names that you probably heard of before, but really interesting names that might be going more like late day 2, day 3, but I think still have top ceiling wide receiver 1 territory. Like with the guys that we're going to get to, just because I want to make sure we prepare the audience. We're not really going to talk about deep like sleepers.
I have one deep sleeper. I have one.
Adam does have one. I'll let you talk about him, but we're not, for the most part, we're not going to get into guys that are like, oh, if I take him in my 4th or 5th rookie round pick that I'm looking for to hit. We're talking about guys that are going to probably be in like your late 2nd, 3rd round in your rookie drafts, kind of to look out for, who could actually have potentially big ceilings. So Adam, I'll let you go first with your first sleeper.
On paper, my first receiver was Brazel. I can talk about Jeremy Bernard, though, if we just want to.
Well, go ahead. You go with the deep sleeper first. Fine. This is our one deep sleeper that we got for you guys.
All right, we'll give you one deep sleeper. This is a fun one. Eli Heidenreich out of Navy. We got a military academy player on the show, which is awesome. No, Eli Heidenreich is so fascinating to me. He tested fantastic. Like I don't have his RAS right in front of me right now. Actually, I can pull it up really quick. But like, where are we at? Yeah, 9.25 and 8.7, 87th percentile yards per route run at Navy. I believe he is their receiving leader over his career. And his position on Navy's depth chart is slot back. I don't know when the last time you've heard of a slot back before. But it's been a while. So he's someone who I've seen some people grade him as a running back. I've seen some people grade him as a receiver. To me, he is very clearly a receiver. He had like 900 receiving yards this past season, and I think he had like 500 rushing yards. And that's like Navy, who if they could go the next 10 years without throwing the ball, I think they would. So that he was getting 900 receiving yards at Navy, I think it goes to show you that they clearly valued him in that regard. Now, he's someone who's going to go late, but I could actually see it being earlier than people expect. Like, it's going to be day 3, but earlier on day 3 than people expect, because he is going to be a stellar returner for whoever gets him. And that is, I only bring that up in a fantasy show, obviously, to say I love his odds kind of regardless of draft capital to make a roster, because I think coaches are going to love him. I think he's going to be a stellar returner. I think he will be able to win that job fairly handedly. And then once he does, like, I think he's a great athlete. I think he's got really good lateral quickness. I think talked about the Rams with Lemon. Like, if they wait way too long and get someone like him, I know Sean McVay loves the guy who can run block. And let me tell you, the wide receiver in this class, who is probably has the most run blocking experience, is going to be the guy from Navy, right? So I think he's someone that coaches are really going to like. As you may suspect, doesn't have the most experience in a lot of the route tree that we would expect out of 21st century offenses, but is a very natural receiver. He was a receiver in high school. Like, that was his initial position, and is someone who I think he does everything you could ask for naturally and just doesn't have experience in a 21st century offense. And for that to be the reason he's going as late as he is, I think if there's anyone in the 6th and 7th round that has a chance to like work his way up, I think that he kind of lives in that bucket where it's like the athlete is there, the production is there for what he was given. He just lives in a super, super goofy offense. And Dominator wise, like, I want to say he was like 30%. Like, it was something obscene. Like, it's like, all right, like, if you're gonna be in this weird bucket, like, at least you were a third of the offense doing it.
No, he's somebody who's going to make NFL teams as nothing else as a kick returner.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's definitely going to get on the field one way or another. So I like that. Yeah. So that's our one deep sleeper for you. I like it a lot. I had a couple others that we want to talk about, and Chase wasn't able to be here tonight, but one of the sleepers that he was going to want to talk about was Ted Hurst. And I think it's important that we mention him because he is somebody, at least for me anyway, he's wide receiver 8 on my board. So he's a guy who's getting later draft capital, but I am pretty decently high on. And he's definitely that vertical X type of wide receiver out of Georgia State, 6'3", 195. Actually has a really high probability for a guy who's probably going to get drafted in that late day 2, early day 3 in the NFL draft category for a wide receiver 1 finish. I mean, we're talking like 22% probability based on the model here. And that's high when you're talking about guys like that. Had 125 targets. Okay, he look, Georgia State is not known for a passing attack offense, but he was the passing attack offense. Nearly had 1,000 yards. That's really hard to do in Georgia State as a wide receiver, by the way. 6 touchdowns last year. He had 2.42 yards per route run, and he had an 82 route grade. That puts him right, if you remember, right at that baseline that we need you to be. It's at the bottom end of it, but it's right at that baseline we need you to be potentially a perimeter route running receiver, which is the second archetype that hits the second most out of the archetypes that we talked about. 71.7 grade versus man. You talked about the zone heaviness. But the one thing that does seem to still be in common over the past 10 years, and that's what I base all my data off of, is that if you're going to be a perimeter receiver, you have to be able to you have to have a grade versus man at least over 68. And this is 71.7. So he can beat man-to-man. He's got a good contested catch rate. He's got good yards per route run. Good usage all the way around. Target share, 26.8%. Dominator rating, 32.4%. It's a guy we're looking at that I think is going to make real headway. As long as he winds up in a situation where there's a pathway to early playing time. And this is kind of the problem that we run into. So, and Adam, this is kind of off the top of my head a little bit, but tell me if you agree or not. When it comes to running backs, we can find fantasy value throughout the draft. Like we've just in recent years, we've seen a couple of guys who've gone in the 7th round who wound up being fantasy relevant running backs. And a lot of it has to do with the volatility of the health issue in that position. And they wind up with situations where they can find themselves getting usage. It doesn't happen as often with wide receivers. So the problem that you kind of run into is that, and while obviously it happens, Puka Nacua, but day 3 type of wide receivers typically do not find the pathway to become fantasy relevant in the portion of their career that they're going to need to be if they're ever going to be. So that's where again, like draft capital is always important for every single position, but it might be even more important for wide receivers than say running backs, tight ends, not more than quarterbacks, but those other two skill positions. So that's where the trick's going to be. Can he get boosted up a little bit in the NFL draft and wind up in a situation where he has a real pathway to win out? But I think he has a skill set to do it. What's your read on Ted Hurst?
Yeah, I will admit he is someone who is still on my watch list. But let me, I guess, throw you this because it's kind of why he's still on my watch list. I haven't gotten to him yet because yards per route run, athleticism, like those things are really exciting. One of the things that kind of always makes me feel a certain type of way about some of these smaller school guys is when their quarterbacks are having nearly no success throwing the ball to them. And especially if it's their passer rating is literally worse than their passer rating on the season when they're throwing to him. His targeted passer rating is 76. That's not an NFL passer rating, by the way. That is a collegiate QBR, 76 when he's targeted this past season. And it's one of those things. I don't say that to make it sound like he's a bad receiver because he is not. He is someone who is deservedly in the NFL conversation. I say that to say what that's typically a sign of is like literally the passing offense is like, all right, first read, we're going to try to throw it to him. Don't really care if he's open or not. And like, it's one of those things where you can feed a lot of targets to a guy. It did not necessarily be for any reason other than like the offense is built to just feed him targets. Now he made the most of it because again, the yards per out run is there and that has nothing to do with him getting the targets, right? So like ultimately he made the most of those targets. But just one of those things to say is I think the offense seems to be from the outside looking in. Again, he's on my list. He's one of the next guys on my list. But just of like, it feels like the offense was built to just try to force him the ball come hell or high water.
Yes, because Georgia State's only going to force the ball. And everybody knows when they do throw the ball, it's going to, they know what wide receiver is going.
Right.
That would be my caveat to that argument. But yes, very much understood. And that's also why he's not going as a high draft capital type of wide receiver in the NFL draft either. Did you have another sleeper or did you want me to get to my other ones?
So transparency. Chase initially had Brazil, so I threw him in because of that. Jeremy Bernard was initially my sleeper, so I'll get to him really quick since we have the time. He's someone who I think is likely to go somewhere between. I think probably goes late day 2, to be honest with you. I could see early day 3, but I think third round's probably where it makes sense. And he's someone who I just think does a lot of things really well. He's got really solid hands. I don't think he actually is that explosive, but it's so funny that Alabama, of all schools, really wanted him to be their gadget explosive guy. Like they were lining him up in the backfield. They were doing all of these things. Like they're motioning him almost every single play, which there's two parts of that, and it's a good and a bad. It's one, they did think the world of him to make the effort to try to get him open all the time. 2, they're terrified of his release package, and I get it because my guy is not getting off the line of scrimmage. So it's the give and take, right? Where they clearly thought it was worth it despite that. Like, let's hide the problem and get him the ball. But also that there is a problem there. But he's someone who I just think is really savvy in all the things he does. I think he's got pretty good hands. I think he's got a good feel for zone. I think he has a 9 RAS. He's not like a bad athlete, but he's just an okay one. And I think he separates really well relative to what he is. I think he made the most of his targets. Doesn't really drop the ball a lot. The yards per out run isn't really what you would want it to be, but I think he's just someone who probably is going to just end up being a ho-hum wide receiver in the NFL. Like we've talked about like the outcomes for these guys. I haven't seen your model. I'm going to throw out a hypothesis. I think it's like a 75% chance he's a wide receiver 3 or 4. I don't really think he's going to bust. I don't really think he's going to be anything better than that. I think he's probably just going to hang around is on an NFL depth chart, a wide receiver 3 or 4. And for fantasy purposes, depending on the offense, probably be a wide receiver 3 or 4.
Yeah, so if you want to know the model, for my model, it actually has him a 35% chance of being a wide receiver 3 and a over 50% chance of him just busting out and not being fantasy relevant. So what you laid out there is true. He has a lot of solid production in his profile, but there's not any one particular metric or trait that sticks out in any kind of capacity that gives him really any kind of top 24 ceiling. And mediocrely, we're talking about a wide receiver 3. You talk about the release package of not being able to get necessarily open if you want to line him up traditionally as a wide receiver. The NFL seems, or at least mock drafts to this point, seem to like him a hell of a lot better than I do. So I have him ranked one spot behind Chris Brazell. I have him at the wide receiver 13 in this class coming in. And typically speaking, especially when we're talking about wide receiver class that while it's deep, isn't overly filled with superstars, we're usually talking about the territory now where guys tend to not hit. And that's kind of where I'm at with a Jeremy Bernard. I don't see anything that translates into a guy, you kind of said it best, ho-hum wide receiver that's going to pop at any kind of capacity at the NFL level. I think he is going to struggle getting open and getting separation, and he's not an overly big guy to make up for that, and he's not an overly great athlete to make up for that. So the bust rate becomes more and more of a likelihood in my eye when it comes to Jeremy Bernard. And again, you're talking about him as a sleeper, so I'm not bashing him as a sleeper type of prospect. You're saying there's holes. That's why he's a sleeper in the first place. I'm more bringing this up because there seems to be a lot of people and consensus mock drafts out there who want to push him into a day 2 NFL draft pick, and part of that projected draft capital is what pushing him up other fantasy footballers' boards. And I don't agree that, again, kind of like the Chris Brass situation. I'm like, you might get that draft capital, but my model is still not liking you even if you have it, because right now it does have his projected draft capital baked into the model, and still saying not a big fan of this prospect. I'll finish off the show with my 2 sleepers, because it's the Bell of the Ball brothers. Not that they're related in any kind of capacity, but they're both named Bell. So I got Sky Bell and I got Chris Bell for you. Sky Bell. Now remember back, I said this was going to come into play the entire episode, the archetypes we talked in the beginning. Sky Bell falls into that slot-leaning type of wide receiver. But, and I'm not saying he is these players, but like Justin Jefferson, like that we talked about, like Jalen Waddle, more closely to Jalen Waddle, he's not the slot typical sized wide receiver. We're talking about a guy who is 6 foot, who is over 190 pounds. And after we've come off a few years where we're talking about slot receivers, who are basically barely $150, it's actually pretty decent size. We're talking about a guy who plays in that type of situation. Now, Rashee Rice is somebody who popped up in his model. I like, as far as the comps go, I like a lot. Sky Moore was also one. Zay Jones was one. Less crazy about those, but, guys that hung around the NFL for a little while. He doesn't have a great probability as far as overall ceiling. About maybe a 10% chance of being a wide receiver 1, more likely to be a wide receiver 2, 3 type, heavy chance on the bust though. I mean, we're still talking 65% bust, and I can understand why. But he was highly productive last season, over 1,200 yards, 13 touchdowns. He was the UConn passing attack offense, and he did it at an efficient rate. We're talking about a guy at 141 targets, but still had over 3 yards per route run, 3.13 to be exact. He had 34.5% targets per route run. His route grade was 85. His dominator rating was 38.9. Like, everything you put together, shared numbers are amongst the elite when it comes to overall production. Yes, it was in a smaller school, not necessarily against the greatest of competition, but this is a genuine athlete. He graded out in the 86th percentile in my model when it comes to athleticism. So I got a high producer with a high athletic score who is a slot type with a bigger type of body, who I think can be on the field in 2 wide receiver sets. I mean, he's checking off the boxes you're looking for to be able to hit for those ceiling outcomes, especially when you outline the archetypes that we talked about. So Sky Bell, somebody who really kind of, or Skyler Bell, I should say, is really kind of popping out to me from that instance. Chris Bell, different type of wide receiver, right? 6'2", 222. Good God, if he didn't get injured, we'd be talking about him potentially being a first-round draft pick. So from that alone, he's tantalizing. Michael Thomas comes up. Jaden Higgins comes up. I would say a slight version of A.J. Brown kind of pops up. But for a guy that we're pushing down boards, who nobody really knows, like right now, he's kind of pigeonholed as like a third round draft pick, maybe. But because of his injury, there is such a wide volatility on where we think this guy he could be day 2, he could be late day 3. He honestly could go anywhere across the board. But he's a 28% historical probability of being a wide receiver 1, given his production, given his athleticism, given his size. 2.55 yards per route run as a big athlete like that. Very efficient. 27% target share, 32.7% dominator rating. Through everything, he's got what you want. He has the share. He has the athleticism, 84th percentile, so a well above average athlete. The size to dominate. And he's also a type of guy that even at his size, where I do say he's a light A.J. Brown, remember, A.J. Brown didn't become a pigeonholed X receiver until he got to the Philadelphia Eagles. When he was with the Tennessee Titans, he lined up all over the field. When he was with Ole Miss, he lined up all over the field. Chris Bell can play a very similar situation. The problem is, depending on draft capital, and if he doesn't play next season because of his injury, it might be really difficult for him to get a pathway. Because when you're a rookie wide receiver who doesn't play in that first year and you're not a first-round draft capital, like, yes, it worked out for Jameson Williams, but remember, he was taken in the first round. They're not going to be committed to you enough to definitively give you a chance if it's year 2. So that's the risk that you kind of run with a Chris Bell. But if he didn't have the injury, I think we're talking about him as a first-round pick. So he has to be here as a potential sleeper. So let me get your reactions to the Bell guys here, and then we'll close up the show.
Yeah. Skyler Bell, I think we see very much so the same way. He's someone who I think the floor is pretty good for. Like, I think that he's much of like what I said about Ted Hurst, that is like somewhat concerning, where the offense is definitely just built to feed him the ball. And there's some give and take there where part of it is definitely warranted, and part of it is just like them almost giving him the ball in ways that I don't think is what's best for him. Like, they definitely used him as like the dump off screens, like almost he's functionally our run game type of guy. I don't think that's his game. I think he is a fantastic route runner when he gets the opportunity to do that. He's one of the few guys in this class who not only had over 3 yards per route run, but in both man and zone, like, it doesn't matter. He's getting his 3 yards per route run. And he's someone who in the past at UConn has been someone who has operated more down the field. Like, he has experience going more down the field. And it was just this season they kind of had to use him that way. So I really like Skyler Bell. I think he's someone who, if you just go ahead and watch 2025, you might pigeonhole him a certain way, but I don't think he's that player. I think he is capable of doing that, and that's what UConn needed him to be. But he's capable of other things. He's certainly not a guy just going to go be an X every down, but I think he's someone who can move around the formation. I think he's a good route runner. I don't think he's I'm just going to get my yak kind of guy. I think that's just what they needed him. And then with Chris Bell, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. If it wasn't for the injury, then you'd really just be looking as far as your concerns, right? Like, you just be looking at, is it a one-year wonder type of situation? Because his yards per route run the rest of his career aren't anything particularly special. But you say that because he was having a very special start to this past season when he got hurt. And I say start, he got like a good portion of the season in before he got hurt, and that's why it may linger through this next season. And definitely someone who you go watch 2025, like, there's first round wide receiver tape in 2025, to your point. And he's someone who has the athleticism for that draft capital and all of these things. I could certainly see teams getting excited about him and drafting him at day 2. I think from a fantasy perspective, kind of, you laid it out really well. Like, that's what you need, is at least a day 2, early day 2, so that teams like are tied to him. Because if he slips late day 2 into day 3, then it's just hard to marry yourself to a guy who might not play as a rookie. Like, it really is. So, one of the most volatile players in this year's draft, but I think with injuries from a fantasy perspective, like, these guys who are going to miss time early on, like that is volatility, and that can be both a good and a bad thing. Like these are, it's a way that you can get high risk, high reward guys in the mid rounds of your rookie drafts. So for player profiles like him, I think that there's a high chance that he is going to end up being someone that I want to take at the capital it's going to take in dynasty rookie drafts.
Yeah. So that's going to wrap it up for today's show. I hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back next week. We're talking about the tight end rookie class, and we'll have Jeremy Popelards from FTN on to help us go through that class. An interesting class it is actually at tight end position. It's never a deep class in tight end position, but there's actually a few interesting names here that I think we'll have some good conversations about. Make sure you download Operation Domination on your favorite podcast app. Make sure you go to our video content on the Fantasy Football Advice Network YouTube channel at FF Advice Net. Keep your calendars marked. On April 23rd and April 24th, we're going to be giving you a live stream with the NFL draft going on. It's going to be fun. We're going to have all the guys from the Fantasy Football Advice Network circling through, including us, yours truly, hosting the whole thing, and you'll get some live reactions as the prospects come on down. So mark your calendars there and make sure you're subscribed to the Fantasy Football Advice Network YouTube channel. Till then, have a good one.